The sun was rising over the jagged horizon, and the camp stirred to life with a kind of rhythm that soldiers knew too well, the metallic clatter of rifles being checked, the muted shouts of men calling orders, the hum of engines warming to life. It was the start of another dangerous day, and for the SEAL team, the mission ahead was already set in stone. They carried themselves with the confidence of warriors who had survived countless battles before. But there was a figure among them who did not draw the same attention. She sat quietly behind the wheel of the SUV, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes steady and unshaken. She was the driver dismissed by many as nothing more than transport. Nothing more than the one who made sure the team arrived and departed in one piece. She was not adorned with heavy weaponry. Her vest was lighter, her movements more reserved, yet her silence carried a weight few could read. The commander barked orders and the men responded with precision, checking magazines, securing straps, adjusting scopes. The air was filled with the smell of fuel and oil mixed with the dust that never left the land around them. And while the others moved with noisy efficiency, the driver remained still, her gaze fixed on the open ground beyond the wire. She studied the faint line of the dirt road, stretching toward the horizon where the mission would lead them. It was a road she had driven before, a path that seemed ordinary to the others, but to her it carried echoes. Each bump and rut, each curve in the terrain, it all told a story, and she had learned to listen the night before. She had slept lightly, every sound stirring her awake, because she could not shake a sense of unease, the kind of instinct that pressed at her chest like a warning. She had been overlooked from the very beginning of her time with the team, her name rarely spoken, her actions rarely praised. She was given the keys, expected to follow orders, expected to wait in silence until the men returned from whatever firestorm they had entered. The commander often said she was reliable, nothing more, nothing less. The team sometimes joked about her calling her chauffeur, though not cruelly, just with the careless tone of warriors who had never needed to see her do more than drive. They did not know her history. They did not know the years she had spent training before she had been placed behind the wheel. They did not know the scars she carried that she never showed yet. Though they knew nothing, she carried everything with her quietly. As dawn stretched its light over the camp, the SUV engines roared alive one by one. The convoy lined up, dust rising in clouds that hung in the air like smoke. The men piled into their vehicles, adjusting their gear as they prepared for hours of travel through hostile land. They trusted their rifles and each other. They trusted their planning, but they did not think to trust the driver. She slid into her seat with calm movements, hands rapping the steering wheel with deliberate strength. Her eyes scanned the mirrors, checked the gauges, noted the distance to the vehicle ahead. Every detail recorded without thought. She felt the vibration of the engine beneath her feet, and with it a subtle unease, her instincts whispering that today would not be ordinary. They rolled out of the wire and into the open road, tires grinding against dirt. The radio crackled with brief chatter, but soon fell quiet. The air outside was heavy, the kind of silence that pressed on the mind. The men in the back joked lightly, speaking about nothing of importance, their laughter rising above the hum of the engine. But the driver did not join in. Her eyes were locked on the road and the land around them. She noticed the details others missed: the shape of the dust, the stillness of the trees, the faint line of tire marks pressed into the earth. Fresh, uneven, too hurried. It was not right. She felt her chest tighten, but she said nothing. Her silence was habit-formed. Over years, she knew that if she spoke too soon, if she voiced fear without proof, the men would laugh, brush it off, call her cautious. She could not distract them. She could not break their focus. Yet the warning in her mind grew louder with every mile. The road narrowed ahead, bending between low hills where trees reached closer to the path. The shadows were deeper there, the terrain ideal for something unseen. Her grip on the wheel tightened, her jaw set hard. She glanced in the mirror. The other vehicles kept pace. The commander sitting in the back gave no notice of her unease. They trusted the route they had taken it before and survived, but she knew better than to believe in routine. Routine was what enemies counted on. They studied patterns and prepared their strikes. She knew this truth because she had once been the one to study others' patterns and plan the strike she thought of that time, but pushed it down, burying it like she always did. The convoy entered the bend and the silence thickened. The jokes faded. The men seemed to sense something, though they did not yet see it. Her eyes darted to the side, a flicker, a shimmer that did not belong. The tree line moved in a way that was not natural, a shadow too quick, too deliberate. Her breath caught. She pressed her foot against the pedal, not yet slamming forward, but ready. Every instinct screamed within her body. Every memory of training clawed its way to the surface, and though she remained still on the outside, her mind was racing. She had seconds, maybe less, and still she said nothing because what she saw could still be nothing, but her instincts told her it was everything. The radio crackled with static, and then silence again. The commander leaned forward as if sensing the change. But before a word could be spoken, the driver's eyes locked on something glinting in the tree line. A fragment of light catching metal. Her heart pounded hard enough she thought it would echo in the vehicle. She gripped the wheel so tightly, her knuckles blanched white. The moment was frozen. A breath caught between life and chaos, and in that suspended silence she knew the road ahead was not clear. She knew the team was seconds from discovering what she had already seen. But she could not yet tell them because the world was about to tell them in its own way. The convoy rolled deeper into the stretch of broken hills, the road turning to dust beneath their tires. The driver kept her eyes locked forward, her body tense with the kind of focus that no one else inside the vehicle shared. The seals behind her shifted and joked, passing time, as if the land around them was empty, as if danger was something only waiting at the mission site. But she knew better. Every mile of dirt carried risk. Every tree line whispered a warning. And today those whispers grew louder with each passing moment. The air grew still, too still, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears and made the skin crawl. She noticed how the birds had vanished, how the leaves hung heavy without wind, how the soil carried markings that spoke of hurried movement. The tread of tires pressed deep into the road edges as though vehicles had been rushed into place, then withdrawn. She wanted to speak, but habit and pride held her back. She had warned others in the past only to be brushed aside as nervous or overthinking. So now she said nothing, but her chest tightened like a knot refusing to loosen. The SUV behind her kept close, its headlights briefly flashing. Against the dust cloud rising from her tires, the commander inside her own vehicle leaned forward every few moments, as if sensing something was off. But still, no one gave voice to it. The radio crackled now and then, with static, empty and meaningless. She listened to every sound. More than the words, she listened for what was missing, for what did not belong, because silence itself could be the loudest alarm, and the silence now was unbearable. Her eyes scanned the ridgeline above them, the slope of the hills pressing inward like walls closing around the convoy, each bend in the road narrowing their path until escape became harder and harder. She adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, her palms slick, though her movements appeared steady. She felt the weight of the SUV and the men inside pressing down on her shoulders. She carried them all without their knowledge, though they believed she was only the driver. She knew she was much more. She was the difference between survival and destruction. If her instincts were right, a flicker of movement caught her eye on the right side. A flash too quick to belong to nature, a glint that betrayed metal. Her breath caught, but she forced herself not to overreact. She slowed slightly enough to let the vehicle behind close the gap. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She did not dare look directly at what she had seen, because sometimes the act of noticing was enough to trigger those waiting in the shadows. She fixed her gaze on the road. Ahead yet, her mind marked the spot, her body preparing for what was coming, even as the others in the back laughed at a story. One of them told. Her ears caught another sound, faint and layered beneath the hum of the engine, a metallic click subtle, yet unmistakable for anyone who had lived around war. Her eyes darted left, and she saw it this time, not just a shimmer, but the silhouette of a figure pressed into the tree-line rifle slung forward, face hidden behind shadow. Her stomach dropped. She was right. The road was not clear. The ambush had already been set. Her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. She pressed her foot gently on the pedal, building speed, but not yet enough to alert the team she needed the right moment, the perfect second between their oblivion and their survival. She could shout, but words would waste time she could break. But that would seal them in. She had only one option: to keep moving, to turn momentum into a weapon, and trust that her instincts carried them through. The team behind her still laughed, though one or two glanced at the windows, sensing something unsettled about the silence around them. One SEAL leaned forward, tapping the commander on the shoulder. A question forming on his lips, but it was too late. The driver had already seen the flash in the trees, the long barrel of a weapon shifting into firing position, and she knew the ambush was no longer waiting. It was about to begin. She tightened her grip, leaned forward, and felt her breath stop inside her chest. Every nerve in her body alive, every muscle tensed for impact. The land around her seemed to hold its breath too, waiting for the first shot to shatter the silence the dust rising from. Their tires hung like smoke in the air, and the ridgeline above them seemed to press closer. Closing the trap with every second, her eyes darted to the left, then to the right, counting shadows, shapes, movements that did not belong. The commander in the back finally leaned forward to speak, his eyes narrowing at the way she hunched over the wheel. But before his words could come, the driver's eyes widened. She had caught another flicker, another glint of steel directly ahead across the bend, and she knew then that the trap was full circle. They were not only flanked, they were boxed in from the front too. The weight of it crushed down on her chest like a stone, and she knew she had seconds, maybe less, to act. Her heart pounded her ears, filled with the sound of blood rushing, yet her hands were steady. Her foot hovered over the pedal, ready to drive the SUV forward with every ounce of force it could muster. She wanted to scream to warn the men inside, but the sound died in her throat. As the world around them suddenly seemed to shift, shadows, lunged shapes moved. The air grew thicker, as if charged with electricity, and in that instant she knew the ambush was already springing into life. The last thing she saw before it began was the faintest spark of light at the corner of the ridge, like the reflection of fire about to erupt, and her chest tightened so sharply she thought her ribs would snap. She gritted her teeth, her fingers gripping the wheel like iron, and she leaned forward. Her body locked to act the moment the first shot cracked the silence. The explosion ripped the silence apart, fire leaping from the hillside with a roar that shook the earth. The lead vehicle swerved violently as shrapnel tore across its frame. Glass shattered metal, twisted. The driver felt the shock wave slam into her chest, but she held the wheel steady, her arms rigid against the force. The SUV rocked under the blast, but did not stop. She drove through the wave of dust and debris, her eyes wide, her breath locked inside her lungs. The ambush had sprung exactly as she feared, and now survival depended on what she did in the next few seconds. Gunfire followed, sharp and unrelenting rattling against the armored hull of the convoy. Bullets sparked off steel tires, shredded under the hail of rounds. One SUV ground to a halt, its occupants spilling out into the dirt, scrambling for cover. The commander shouted orders, his voice swallowed by the chaos as the enemy poured from the tree-line, rifles blazing and war cries echoing through the valley. The road was filled with fire and noise, the perfect kill zone carved into the earth by those who had waited for them. The driver slammed her foot down. The SUV leapt forward, dust swirling. Behind its tires, she knew stopping meant death. Staying in the trap meant certain destruction. The vehicle roared across the broken path, smashing through the first makeshift barricade logs, and debris splintered under the force, but still more obstacles. Waited ahead, the enemy had planned this too well. She gritted her teeth and rammed forward, using the weight of steel, as her weapon bodies scattered as she forced the SUV into their lines. She drove not with fear, but with instinct. Each turn calculated. Each strike deliberate. The men inside braced wide-eyed for the impact of every move. The commander shouted again, but his words faded into the storm of battle. The SEALs fired from the windows, their rifles barking back at the attackers' muzzle flashes, cutting through the haze, but there were too many. The hills swarmed with figures, shadows darting between trees, rifles snapping from every angle, and still, the driver kept the wheel steady, weaving the SUV between bursts of fire cutting through choke. Points slamming into barricades, every move buying seconds, each second a lifeline for the men who fought beside her. She felt the vehicle lurch as a tire caught on shredded earth. The frame groaned under the strain, but she forced it onward. Her eyes burning through the dust, her heart pounding with unbroken rhythm. She did not flinch. She could not flinch because the moment she hesitated, the convoy would collapse around her. She leaned forward, pressing the SUV through another barricade. The impact jolted her bones, but she gripped tighter, her breath sharp, her vision clear. Bodies fell around them, cries rang out in every direction. Still she did not stop. The enemy fire grew heavier. Machine guns opened from higher ground, bullets tearing long. Lines across the dirt forcing the vehicles into a narrow funnel. Her SUV rattled under the storm. The windshield cracked under the barrage. She ducked lower, but her hands never left the wheel. She saw the ridgeline above marked with muzzle flashes, each one spitting death toward them, and she knew that if she did not break the line soon, the convoy would not survive. She felt the weight of every soul pressing on her shoulders, and she refused to let them fall. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. The taste of metal on her tongue, the roar of engines mixed with the screams of men. The world was chaos. But in the chaos, she found clarity. Her eyes darted left-right, calculating angles, distances, the slope of the terrain, the timing of gunfire. She saw openings where no one else looked, and she took them, twisting the SUV sharply, ramming into an enemy truck that had rolled across the path. The crash echoed through the valley, sparks flying as steel crushed steel, and the attackers scattered. In panic, she slammed the pedal again, pulling the SUV free from the wreckage just as another explosion tore the ground where she had been seconds before. Her arms burned from the effort, her lungs seared, but she kept moving, her ears ringing from the blasts, her skin slick with sweat. She was no longer just a driver. She was a weapon, a force that could not be stopped. The SEALs inside began to see it too, their eyes widening with every move as they realized the woman they dismissed as ordinary was carrying them through hell with unshaken hands and a fury that none of them had expected. The ground shook as another rocket streaked from the hillside, striking the last vehicle in the convoy. Flames erupted, smoke rising thick and black. The screams of men filled the air. The commander roared orders to regroup, to return fire, to push through. But even he turned his gaze to the driver, because she was no longer just following the road. She was carving one from the fire around them. Swung the SUV left then right, slamming enemies aside with brutal precision. Bullets rattled through the frame, but she drove on, never slowing, never yielding. Her eyes locked on the bend ahead where the road narrowed again, the perfect choke point. For another strike, she felt it in her bones. The trap was layered. The enemy always planned in layers, and she knew the next blow would fall the moment they reached it. Her heart pounded faster, her grip on the wheel so tight her knuckles ached. She pressed the pedal harder, forcing the SUV to surge faster, dust and smoke rising in a storm around them, the men inside bracing for whatever waited ahead. Her breath sharp, her mind clear. She whispered silently to herself without words, only thought. Hold steady. Hold steady. Hold steady. And then she saw it. The faint glint of wires stretched low across the road, almost invisible in the chaos, a trigger line for explosives buried in the dirt. Her eyes widened. Her body tensed. And in that instant, she knew the next second would decide everything, whether they lived or died, whether the mission ended here or carried on. She had to act before anyone else even understood what lay ahead, and she had no more than a heartbeat to do it. Her eyes locked. On the faint shimmer across the dirt road, thin wires stretched low just high enough to catch the undercarriage of a rushing vehicle. She had only a breath to decide, only a heartbeat to act. Her instincts screamed louder than the gunfire rattling. All around, she yanked the wheel hard, sending the SUV swerving into the ditch. The tires bit into loose soil. The frame groaned. The men inside shouted as their bodies slammed against armor plates, but the vehicle missed the trigger by inches. A deafening blast erupted behind them. The earth tore open in a violent roar fire, and dirt rose high into the sky, swallowing the second SUV in flames. The shockwave slammed into her chest. The force shook the vehicle, nearly throwing it sideways, but she kept the wheel steady, forcing the SUV back onto the path. Her vision blurred with dust. Her ears rang from the blast. The screams of men echoed behind, but there was no time to look back, no time to grieve. She pressed the pedal harder, pushing forward, because stopping meant death. The ambush was layered every turn, a trap, every shadow hiding fire, and still they had to move forward. The SEALs inside gripped their rifles tighter. One of them glanced at her, his face pale, his eyes wide, realizing she had seen what none of them had seen, realizing she had saved them from being torn apart by the blast. But he said nothing. Words had no place in this storm, only action. She felt their eyes on her now, no longer dismissing her as the quiet driver. No longer laughing at her silence. She was the thin line between survival and annihilation, and they knew it. The hillside erupted again, muzzle flashes spitting fire machine guns hammering at the convoy from both sides. Bullets tore into the ground, sparks flying. From steel, every direction became a corridor of death. The commander shouted for suppression fire, his voice raw. The SEALs leaned out of the SUV windows, unleashing precise bursts, cutting down silhouettes. In the tree line, but for every enemy that fell, more appeared like shadows, multiplying in smoke. The driver swerved left, then right, weaving between impact zones, forcing the SUV into angles that gave the gunners better shots. She was not only driving, she was fighting with the vehicle itself, turning it into cover, turning it into a weapon. The air grew thick with smoke, acrid and suffocating, the stench of burning rubber mixed with the metallic taste of blood and dust. Her eyes stung, but she refused. To blink, her body moved faster than thought, instinct guiding every shift of the wheel, every slam of the pedal. She cut down another barricade, ramming through wooden beams. The crash shook the frame, splinters shattered across the windshield, but the path opened just long enough to push forward. Her arms ached. Her lungs burned, but she did not falter. She could not falter. Suddenly, the road ahead blocked again. A truck positioned sideways, its bed stacked with sandbags, its gunner perched behind. A mounted weapon already swiveling toward them, the barrel glinting in the light. She knew if that gun fired, their vehicle would be shredded in seconds. The SEALs fired, but the gunner braced behind cover. Unfazed bullets sparking off steel. The driver leaned forward, pressing the pedal to the floor. The SUV roared like a beast unleashed. She aimed straight for the truck, her heart pounding like war drums. The SEALs shouted in disbelief, bracing for the impact as the distance closed faster and faster. The gunner opened fire, the heavy weapon tearing chunks from the ground, ripping lines across the SUV frame. The armor shook, groaned, threatened to fail, but still, she drove on her teeth, clenched her vision, narrowing to a tunnel of steel and fire. The truck loomed closer, The barrel flashed again, and then the SUV slammed into the barricade with bone-shattering force. The world exploded in sparks and metal. The truck lurched sideways, crashing into the ditch, the gunner thrown violently into the air. The mounted weapon silenced at last. The impact rattled her bones. Her arms felt like lead, but she refused to stop. She reversed hard, pulling the SUV back into the road. The tires screamed. The frame shuddered, but it held together the seals inside. Staggered from the crash, bruised but alive, their eyes locked on her now with something unspoken, something that bordered between disbelief and awe. She did not wait for words. She spun the wheel hard, pushing them onward again. Bodies poured from the tree line, trying to close the distance, rifles spitting fire grenades arcing through the air. She swerved hard, avoiding one that landed just feet from the vehicle. The blast sent dirt and flame washing over the side panels, the heat searing through the metal, but still she held the line. She grabbed the sidearm at her thigh, firing through the cracked window, a clean shot that dropped an enemy as he prepared to launch another grenade. Her hand steady, her breathing sharp, as if she had always been meant to fight like this. The SEALs regrouped, firing in unison, their rifles stitching death across the hillside. The commander barked orders for the flank to be cleared, but even he glanced at her with something like respect, something like recognition, that the mission was surviving because she refused to break. She maneuvered again, pushing into a wider section of road where smoke hung low and vision blurred. Her eyes darted, constantly searching for the next threat, because she knew it was not over, not yet. The ground shook again. Another explosion rocked the valley. This one not from buried charges, but from a rocket fired from higher ground. The projectile screamed overhead. Striking the far end of the road, a wall of fire erupted, blocking the path forward. The SEALs cursed their rifles, barking furiously at the hillside, but the enemy was relentless. They were boxed in fire behind them. Fire ahead, no escape left, and yet she did not freeze her mind. Raced. Her eyes tracked the slope of the hillside, and she saw it, an opening narrow. Dangerous but real. A dirt track winding upward, half hidden by brush, barely wide enough for a vehicle to squeeze through. It was not a road, but it was the only chance. Her voice cut through the chaos. For the first time, sharp and commanding, "Hold on," she shouted, and before anyone could question, she yanked the wheel hard, sending the SUV crashing through brush up the narrow incline. Dirt and rock tumbled down around them. The tires spun, but gripped. Climbing with desperate force, enemy fire followed, but the angle saved them, bullets striking earth instead of steel. The climb shook every bone in their bodies, but she pushed harder, the engine roaring as the vehicle clawed its way upward. The SEALs, held on white, knuckled their eyes wide as they realized she had chosen a path none of them had even seen. She drove with relentless focus, weaving around boulders, forcing the SUV through gaps that seemed impossible, each second carrying them higher, each second pulling them from the trap below. The commander finally shouted in disbelief as realization struck her. Choice had saved them from annihilation, yet her face remained cold, unshaken. Her eyes locked on the ridge above, because she knew the fight was far from finished, and as they crested the rise, breaking through the smoke into the harsh light above the valley, she saw what waited on the other side, a force larger than before, shadows moving with purpose, weapons raised, positions. Already fortified, the first ambush had only been the opening strike, and now the true battle revealed itself, waiting to crush them from the ridge ahead. The SUV crested the ridge, and the sight ahead froze every breath in the vehicle. The hillside stretched wide with enemies dug into cover, rifles and machine guns pointed directly at them. It was not a small force, but an entire line of fighters ready to rain fire and finish what the valley below had begun. The SEALs tensed, their rifles ready. But the driver knew the moment the first shot cracked. They would be pinned here with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. She slammed the brake hard, dust exploding around them, the vehicle skidding sideways to create a shield. She threw open the door and stepped into the storm. Her boots hit the dirt with a force that matched the pounding in her chest, but her hands were steady. Her rifle came up in one swift motion. The SEALs hesitated for a heartbeat, stunned at the sight of their driver. Stepping into fire without hesitation, then she pulled the trigger. The first enemy fell, the second. Followed her aim, precise, each shot deliberate. She was no longer hidden behind the wheel, no longer the silent shadow. She was something else entirely. A fighter unleashed after years of restraint. The hillside erupted with fire bullets snapping past her ears, kicking dirt into the air, yet she did not falter. She moved with a rhythm that seemed rehearsed, her body flowing from one target to the next. Her boots grinding into the slope as she advanced. The SEALs spilled from the SUV, now moving behind her, their training snapping into place. But even they struggled to keep up with the speed and precision she showed. Enemies dropped one after another, some never even firing a shot before she cut them down, the line of fighters faltering as they realized the driver was not ordinary. She was death in motion. Her rifle barked again and again until the magazine ran dry. She ejected it with practiced ease, slamming another home before the echo of the last shot had faded. The SEALs covered her flank, but she pushed further into the line, drawing the focus of the attackers. Her presence disruptive, terrifying, her silence broken only by the crack of rounds and the thud of bodies hitting the dirt. Every motion spoke of experience, of scars carried unseen, of training buried beneath years of dismissal and now revealed under fire. When the smoke began to thin, 32 enemies lay across the ridge, some sprawled in cover, some fallen where they had stood. The hillside was silent at last. The SEALs stood breathing hard, their rifles low, their eyes fixed on her. None of them spoke, none of them could. She stood with her rifle still warm, the heat of battle still burning in her veins, her face expressionless, as if she had done nothing extraordinary, but they all knew they had seen something they would never forget. And though the fight was not yet over, they feared what she might become. When the next storm arrived, the ridge above came alive with fire, the air splitting with the hiss of bullets as the SUV skidded to a halt, dust exploding around its wheels. The SEALs braced for impact, but before they could even react, the driver was already out, her boots hitting the ground with a force that stunned them. She raised her weapon with calm precision, her eyes locked, not on escape, but on the swarm of enemies dug in ahead, and in that instant, the ordinary driver was gone, replaced by something else entirely. Her rifle barked and bodies dropped 1, 2, 3 in rapid rhythm, her stance unshaken as if she had lived this moment 1,000 times before the SEALs moved to flank, but they found themselves trailing her pace. She was already advancing up the slope, bullets cutting through the dust around her, but none slowing her down. She flowed from cover to cover, each shot snapping out like a verdict. Enemies scrambled, firing wildly, their numbers high, but their confidence crumbling under the weight of her fury. She reloaded without looking, her hands moving faster than thought, her expression cold. The SEALs exchanged quick glances between bursts of fire, realizing that the driver they had dismissed as ordinary was carrying the fight with a ferocity none of them had expected. One by one, enemies fell, the ridge littered with silence after chaos, and when the last round echoed, she stood alone at the front, her shadow long in the fading light as something darker waited beyond.